So it's, more proud to be a Nazi here than an anti-fascist. If you are definitely an anti-fascist, it means you are not an enemy, but they don't like you.
Just a few weeks ago, 3-4 Nazis assaulted a leftist meeting here. The violence is escalating slowly.
You can mostly say that the government turns a blind eye.
Hogy Orbán Viktor kijátsza az embereket, és most szélső jobbot lát üdvözítőnek, de alapvetően a saját érdekét, saját hatalma megtartását szolgálja, illetve a saját barátainak és a...
Ilaria Salis ha passato 15 mesi nelle carceri ungheresi in condizioni definite come disumane, prima di poter tornare libera grazie all'immunità ottenuta con l'elezione ad europarlamentare. Per il movimento antifascista si tratta di un processo politico. La repressione in Ungheria è infatti all'ordine del giorno. Il governo di Orban prende di mira i media indipendenti, i partiti di opposizione e soprattutto i militanti di sinistra antifascisti ungheresi, che devono anche confrontarsi quotidianamente con le minacce dei neonazisti. Per raccontare questa storia bisogna andare dove tutto è iniziato. Sono quindi volata a Budapest per provare a capire cosa significa essere un attivista di sinistra nell'Ungheria di Orban.
Qui, in questa zona di Budapest, dal 1997 ogni anno neonazisti provenienti da tutta Europa si riuniscono per commemorare il Giorno dell'Onore. È una data in cui i neonazisti commemorano la resistenza dei soldati tedeschi e ungheresi durante l'assedio dell'Armata Rossa durante la Seconda Guerra Mondiale. È anche un'occasione per tantissimi antifascisti provenienti da tutta Europa di venire qui a Budapest per contromanifestare contro la presenza dell'estrema destra che invade tutta la città. L'anno scorso, nel 2023, qui c'era anche Ilaria Salis. Ne parlo insieme a Zilvi Nemet, una giornalista del media indipendente 444 che ha seguito tutto il suo processo fin dall'inizio. Cosa succede a Budapest il Giorno dell'Onore?
There are different kind of demonstrations or marches. For example, there is the statue here nearby in the Capistrán Square. Usually there is like a wrestling ceremony or they are lighting candles. Usually there are some speeches also by the international participants. It's not only domestic groups linked to the far right, but also there are international comrades coming from here. So you hear also speeches there. And after usually there happens like what you kind of can say like a breakout hike or a commemorative hike. And it also received some also marketing and funding from the Hungarian state, and it featured something like the Olympic Pentathlon Games, which was trying to attract everyday people to take up some sport activities, even though this is like a highly ideological act, you could say. So actually, the police already banned the commemorative event several days before, but it was known that the event is going to take place despite of the prohibition, especially because Antifa protesters also gathered here just like a few streets away from here, but the police also secured the areas. There were several instances that people from Betyársereg attacked them, and but then the police managed to push them back to the castle. And actually there was also another scene of violence happening nearby on the intersection of Szilágyi Erzsébet and Moszkva tér. 5 pedestrians just going to grab a lunch, and around 20 people attacked them from behind, and they were identified as well-known members from the Hungarian far-right scene.
Come si comporta la polizia durante questi scontri?
I would say that it's a long and fraught story between authorities and the demonstrators usually during these days. So if you look at the track record, you can say that the police lots of times try to prohibit or systematically ban these events, but it's not only just on them. So there is the court and the Supreme Court, and actually there were instances that even though the police prohibited the event, the Supreme Court overruled this decision and still granted a permit for the commemorations to take place. You can mostly say that the government turns a blind eye.
Ilaria Salis l'anno scorso era lì a manifestare contro i neofascisti. Di cosa è accusata?
So she is accused of attempted felony of life-threatening bodily harm as part of a criminal organization. So all in all, for this, she could face 24 years in prison maximum, but the prosecution offered 11 years in prison that is now suspended because of her immunity as a European parliamentary member. So you can say that the case got politicized from different reasons, I guess, from what was presented in the Italian press, because it was mostly highlighted how she was treated at the court, that she was kind of handcuffed and also her feet was cuffed, but it's actually not something unusual. There was this aspect of the prison conditions, which sadly you can say that it affects everyone who is detained in Hungary exactly in the same way. But if you look at the sentence itself, 11 years is very disproportionate to what usually you would expect in cases like that. You can say that maybe there was a political motive to prove that she was acting in concert with different far-left organizations internationally. And you could also see that in Hungary they use this case to kind of stigmatize opposition politicians and also harass journalists or people that they thought are active in the radical leftist or even on the opposition scene. This scheme that there was really violence on the street of Budapest, this time not from the far right but also from the far left, gave an opportunity to the pro-government media to kind of start really an inquisition against opposition politicians or different leftist groups and frame them not just as violent but also like there was accusations of pedophilia and different kind of stuff that were completely unfounded without any evidence, but it didn't stop them from spreading it or keeping it on the media agenda for almost a half year.
I militanti antifascisti in Ungheria temono per la propria incolumità e questo perché devono fare i conti costantemente con la repressione istituzionale e soprattutto con le minacce di morte che provengono dai gruppi di estrema destra. Per questo motivo li accogliamo in un ambiente sicuro in cui potranno mantenere l'anonimato.
I decided to join the interview because I think the story is getting distorted, because after it entered the realm of high politics, everybody is trying to twist the narrative in a way so they get their own personal or political gain out of it, while there are facts on the ground here and people affected by this. And I think it also should concern people in Western Europe in terms of like what's happening with fascism and anti-fascism, right? Obviously being the target of like the far-right propaganda campaign, receiving death threats, getting attacked on the street. Once this Day of Honor counter-demonstration series started, our main goal was to be as non-violent as possible. The idea was to apply peaceful pressure on the authorities and on the public to have this neo-Nazi march banned. And what happened last year was a major escalation of violence. Just a few weeks ago, 3-4 Nazis assaulted a leftist meeting here. Like they literally broke into the place and like they beat people up. So the violence is escalating slowly.
The situation in Hungary is not too good. So okay, they wouldn't kill me like in Russia, but if I would just use my name and my face, I would have so many bad messages, threatening. sometimes the Nazis just catch the people on the streets and beat them up. And I don't want this. Our government is more far right now.
For the government, what we have seen is that they have this enormous media apparatus that they can use to basically discredit their opponents. And what we saw is that immediately after the big events of last year, they targeted a political organization called Sikra. So they involved Sikra, who are like a milquetoast, left liberal almost kind of organization, of being the culprits who organized the violent communist pogroms and whatever. And they immediately arrested one of their activists, and they held her for 2 weeks while she was innocent. So in 2008 and 2009, there was a series of Nazi murders. Basically, a bunch of Nazis went around the countryside killing Roma people, like women and children. That was like the rise up of Jobbik, and Jobbik had this far-right militant organization called Magyar Garda, which was a paramilitary organization. And in 2008, they had modified the law, which was an anti-discrimination law against hate crimes. It was previously basically used to protect sexual minorities from hate crimes. But they modified the law so it includes the protection of someone's ethnicity or nationality. So you thought that is going to be used to protect the Roma people from the fascist marches. And how the law was used in effect was that when the Magyar Garda went to like a village of Roma people and the Roma people reacted aggressively, they ended up sentencing the Roma people for hate crimes. So like I'm talking dozens of people who were sentenced to 20, 30 years in prison, because of basically being charged by hate crimes. And on the other end, when we do have documented cases of racist attacks done by Nazis, like the law does not apply that harshly. Like they are like the protected minority.
Perché il governo ungherese attacca l'antifascismo?
If you are definitely an anti-fascist, it means you are not an enemy, but they don't like you. And we have so many Nazis in Hungary, and this is a big problem in Hungary. So it's more proud to be a Nazi here than an anti-fascist. And it's fucking sad. The government supports the Nazis. It's not visible for everyone, but if you just go deep to the information, you can see it. So you always have to be attentive. You always have to think about the risk. Back in the day, there was some activists, and when the Nazis recognized them, some people had to move from Hungary because of this. So it's risky.
So there's the idea that this use of the law in selective ways to like even take away the idea of like resisting, right? So it's like a very, very effective tools of repression. And even that's the case if you're doing a counter-protest and you get attacked and you fight back, you may still get charged, with like a hate crime. So this makes it very difficult to do that sort of combative organization that's, I think, more commonplace in the West. But then that's super common. If you get doxxed, then like almost immediately your inbox gets flooded with like Nazis. But like what's more worrying is that they have like their own like fascist media, and then where they publish these people who get doxxed, and it's like they are then targeted, and everybody becomes super paranoid, thinking that like they're everywhere, which makes any kind of organization absolutely insanely difficult, because if you do everything in secret, you can't communicate properly with people.
In che modo organizzate la vostra resistenza?
The purpose of our movement is just stop the Nazis to march in the downtown of Budapest. This is the main aim. We want to be closer to the European values and to don't let the people to threaten other people because their color, or because they not heterosexual, or because they are wearing something like anti-fascist. So the government always needs some enemies because they have to explain why we are the second poorest country in Europe. The problem is always something else, like the war, the immigrants, pedophiles, and they have a new enemy now because of this trial, it's the Antifa. Yeah, the ideology of Orbán is totally Nazi now.
Trump, who wanted to designate Antifa as a terrorist organization, and Fidesz would like to be like, if we could actually do that, you know, if we could actually like claim them as a terrorist organization and get rid of them, that would be like a massive win in the eyes of the international right wing.
I movimenti antifascisti in Ungheria non sono nati proprio ieri. L'Ungheria infatti ha una lunga storia di antifascismo, che è iniziata grazie a coloro che si opposero al nazismo e al fascismo durante la Seconda Guerra Mondiale. L'Associazione degli Antifascisti Ungheresi continua a tenere viva questa memoria. Adesso li andiamo a incontrare nella loro sede.
Hi Vilmos, nice to meet you.
Hello, please. Tehát ez a tábla az érdekes, mert 80 évvel ezelőtt ölték meg az egyik antifasiszta ellenállót, aki végül is a fasiszták ellen küzdött, és nem régen pedig a mostani szélsőjobb verte szét ezt a táblát. Tehát ez a tábla 82 évvel ezelőtti emléket idéz, amikor egy békés háborúellenes tüntetést vert szét a horthy rendőrség, és hát ezért felháborító, mert itt végül is a békéért álltak ki az emberek. Komoly következménye lett ezeknek, elítélték, megverték, meg eltüntették. Tehát a Magyar Ellenállók és Antifasiszták Szövetsége az európai békével egyidős, 1945. május 15-én alakult meg, az akkori ellenállókból, antifasiszta ellenállókból és a koncentrációs táborokból visszajött emberekből. Célja pedig ugye a szervezetnek az, hogy képviselje azokat az értékeket, amit az egykori ellenállók életük kockáztatásával is felvállaltak, végül is az, hogy béke legyen Európában, a világon, és az emberek békességbe tudjanak élni. Ez a cél napjainkban különösen aktuálissá vált.
Quanto è importante l'antifascismo per la memoria storica dell'Ungheria?
Magyarország eléggé különös helyzetben volt, mert végül is 1945-ben nem a magyar ellenállók szabadították fel Magyarországot, hanem a szovjet csapatok, és ugyan voltak itt magyar ellenállók, és részt vettek az ellenállásba, de ezek lényegesen kisebb számban voltak, mint ahogy körülnézünk, mint Jugoszláviában vagy máshol. Viszont épp ezért nagyon értékes az, hogy azért voltak itt magyarok, és akik szembeszálltak a fasizmussal, és amikor ünnepeljük a felszabadulási évfordulót, akkor mindig megemlékezünk arról, hogy a szovjet zászló mellett, piros zászló mellett a nemzeti színű zászló is volt, mert értékelték a szovjet csapatok is, hogy magyar ellenállók is részt vettek az ország felszabadításában.
Perché la memoria antifascista ungherese va preservata?
Hát a magyarok meg olyanok, hogy egy populista politika során sodródnak, és hát amikor 97%-ban kimutathatóan kormányközeli a média, akkor az emberek agymosása, ez folyamatos most már 14 éve, és hát egyre inkább ők is idomulnak. Épp ezért nagyon fontos, hogy egy antifasiszta értékrendet tudjunk képviselni a társadalom előtt. 11 éve volt az, amikor szerveztünk egy antifasiszta tüntetést, és hazafele egy 15 fős csoport megtámadott, és hát meg is vertek, és hát ennek volt végül is egy hosszadalmas bírósági tárgyalás, sok fiatalkorú volt, 7 személyt ítéltek el végül is, és hát ez volt talán az olyan nagyobb dolog, mert először fordult az elő, hogy valakit nem a származása miatt vettek elő a neonácik, tehát hogy zsidó, meleg, cigány, hanem a vallott nézetei miatt is, és ez is ugye egy közösséget jelent, és hát ilyen módon ítélték el őket.
Il vostro lavoro è molto difficile, continuerete a lottare affinché l'Ungheria sia liberata dai neonazisti?
MEASZ-nak van olyan tradicionális szerepe, hogy hogy nyilván annak a vezetőjeként azért ilyen módon számot tartanak. Inkább az a gond az utóbbi időben, hogy nagyon kevés a média felületünk, és még a korábbi barátaink is, akár anyagi okok miatt is egyre inkább a kormány közelébe sodródnak, és hát ilyen módon nagyon nehéz ugye áttörni ezeket a falakat, hogy a gondolatainkat közzel tudjuk adni. Tehát, hogy egész biztosan rosszabb lesz ezzel a kormánnyal. Szokták mondani, hogy Orbán Viktor ilyen fasiszta, olyan fasiszta, de én meg szoktam védeni, hogy ő nem fasiszta, hanem mindig kiszolgálja az adott korban, az adott időszakban az emberek lelkületét, hogy mit szeretnének, és hogyha itt Sztálin zászlókkal vonulnának a tömegek, akkor odaállna. Itt magyarokban óhatatlanul megvan az, hogy a múlt miatt is, hogy nem igazán fogadják el az antifasiszta értékeket, és épp ezért könnyű őket belevinni egy nosztalgikus érzés alapján, ami ugye a Trianontól kezdődik, amikor ugye Magyarországnak az 1/3 maradt meg már az első világháborúban, ez a nosztalgikus érzés meglovagolva. Hogy Orbán Viktor kijátsza az embereket, és most szélső jobbot lát üdvözítőnek, de alapvetően a saját érdekét, saját hatalma megtartását szolgálja, illetve a saját barátainak és a rokonainak a gyarapodását. Hát ezt természetesen nem hagyhatjuk abba, mert ezt meggyőződésből tesszük. Én is gyakorlatilag a tevékeny életem nagy részét ugye erre szántam, és hát ezt így folytatom, még hogyha ellenszémbe is lehet, de hát a kollégáim is hasonló módon vélekednek. Az más kérdés, hogy manapság szokták mondani, hogy ki milyen generáció, tehát hogy mikor született, és úgy hát mi egy kicsit azért távolabb állunk a mai korszerűbb kommunikációs technikáknál, de minden igyekezetünk arra van, hogy az újabb generációknak is átadjuk ezeket a tapasztalatokat, akár mintát is.
Dopo gli scontri del febbraio 2023, Orban e i media al suo servizio hanno trovato negli antifascisti il nemico perfetto contro cui compattare la società ungherese. Nonostante questo, loro resistono. Alcuni lo fanno da decenni, come Vilmos Anti, che abbiamo appena intervistato. Altri sono più giovani e in forze per manifestare contro i raduni neonazisti. Non sono molti, certo, ma sono uniti da un obiettivo comune: fermare il progressivo spostamento della società ungherese verso l'estrema destra.